Look, let's start by talking about a lab reality we have literally all faced at one point or another. You've spent months optimizing an ELISA, you've carefully selected your antibodies, dialed in your standard curve, and everything looks absolutely beautiful on the bench. But then, you move to testing real study samples and you face the crushing frustration of unexpected false positives in your negative samples. Suddenly, a signal appears where there should be absolutely nothing. It's a massive bottleneck that stops projects dead in their tracks. So today, in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how to troubleshoot this effectively, step by step. So why do these assays that look perfect during development completely fall apart when we move to validation or scale-up? Well, the painful truth usually comes down to exactly how we optimize. Most of us rely on the traditional one factor at a time or OFAT troubleshooting method. You run a plate with a new blocker today. Tomorrow you run a plate with a new wash buffer. It feels like you're making progress, but this kind of random tweaking completely misses the complex interactions between reagents. And when you scale up to diverse biological samples, those hidden interactions rear their ugly heads. To unmask the true problem here, we have to clarify a vital distinction. When things go wrong, we often just wave our hands and blame background. But high background and cross-reactivity are absolutely not the same thing. High background is usually just a diffuse, nonspecific signals scattered across your plate. Cross-reactivity, on the other hand, is much more specific and way more dangerous. It means your assay is actually detecting something real, it's just not detecting your intended target. It's actively binding to a structurally related protein or some interfering molecule that mimics your analyte. When your assay detects the wrong target, it can look incredibly precise while still being entirely wrong. In development, that leads to poor candidate decisions and entirely wasted optimization cycles. Moving into validation, ignoring this distinction leads to selectivity failures, highly inconsistent recovery, and it fundamentally erodes operator confidence. Because think about it, if your team cannot trust whether a positive signal reflects actual biology or just assay interference, your data is essentially useless. Okay, so what's actually causing this? Let's rapidly break down the four main root causes that trigger poor specificity in our assays. Number 1, antibody-related issues, where your reagents bind structurally related proteins. 2, endogenous matrix interference, which acts like a physical bridge between assay components. 3, blocking and wash chemistry, which can actually inadvertently expose unwanted binding events. And 4, the target biology itself, where things like fragmented isoforms trick the assay. Let's look at each of these just a bit closer. Starting with the most common culprit, antibody-related cross-reactivity. This happens when your target belongs to a protein family with conserved domains, or maybe it shares epitopes with other molecules. Now, even if each antibody looks perfectly fine on its own, paired antibodies can create serious hidden issues. For example, your capture antibody might pull down a weak family member from the sample, and then the detection antibody comes in and amplifies that minor event into a massive, deceptive false positive. But hey, it's not always a simple antibody problem. Enter endogenous matrix interference. Biological matrices like serum, plasma, and tissue extracts are incredibly complex soups of proteins, lipids, and complement factors. Things like autoantibodies, heterophilic antibodies, or human anti-animal antibodies are notorious here. They act as matrix-mediated bridges. Basically, they grab onto your capture and detection antibodies simultaneously, physically linking them together. To your plate reader, this mimics true analyte detection perfectly. The third root cause is honestly a bit counterintuitive, but it's crucial to understand. We usually think of blocking buffers and heavy washes as the ultimate cure for bad signal, but tweaking detergent levels, ionic strength, or block conditions can sometimes inadvertently unmask cross-reactive interactions rather than hiding them. A weak cross-reactive interaction might actually be suppressed by your current blocker, and by changing that blocker to solve a background issue, you might suddenly expose a glaring specificity problem. Finally, sometimes the biology itself is just tricking you. If your assay definition isn't incredibly tight, complex target biology and sample handling will cause false positives. Are you measuring intact analyte, a single isoform, or a cleavage product? If your sample handling involves multiple freeze-thaw cycles that generate degraded fragments, your antibodies might bind those fragments unpredictably. The assay is actually behaving exactly as designed, but the biology has completely shifted under your feet. So we have these four incredibly complex root causes. How do we actually fix them? We need a massive mindset shift. We have to completely abandon the traditional, inefficient OFAT method, where we test one factor at a time, and embrace the multivariate power of design of experiments, or DOE. With OFAT, you are completely blind to interacting variables. A wash buffer that works today might fail tomorrow when the sample matrix changes even slightly. DOE changes the game by revealing how these complex interactions behave simultaneously. Now, I want to completely demystify design of experiments for you right now. It gets treated like this terrifying, dense mathematical theory, but it is actually a highly accessible, totally practical bench tool. Frankly, it's the only logical way to map out the complex reagent interactions that are causing bottlenecked pipelines in your lab. By testing multiple variables at the same time, DOE allows you to see exactly how your blocker interacts with your capture antibody concentration and how both of those interact with your specific matrix. Let's transition into how we apply this mindset right at the bench. Before you even set up a DOE, you have to stop the random plate-by-plate tweaking. You need to move to a structured decision tree and a truly data-driven workflow. If you are just blindly swapping blockers from the fridge, hoping the false positives will magically go away, you are going to waste weeks, if not months, of your life. To get from theory to the bench, I'm going to walk you through a highly effective 5-step troubleshooting workflow specifically for ELISA false positives. We're going to define the pattern, challenge the antibodies, separate the matrix effects, probe the blocker strategically, and finally recheck our logic. Let's look at exactly how to execute this. Step 1. Define the false positive pattern before you change a single condition on your plate. You need to map exactly where that undesired signal appears. Does it track with a specific operator, a specific disease state, a certain reagent lot, or only the hemolyzed samples lighting up? If you skip this mapping step, you run a massive risk of optimizing against a total artifact that only exists in one tiny corner of your workflow. Step 2 is to aggressively challenge your antibodies. You need to run a deliberate cross-reactivity panel to challenge the assay against plausible biological interference. Go ahead and spike in homologous proteins, related biomarkers, precursor or metabolite forms, and endogenous binding partners at realistically high concentrations. You have to prove, without a doubt, whether your assay is truly selective for your specific target, or if it's just happily binding to any near-neighbor protein that happens to float by. Step 3. Separate antibody promiscuity from actual matrix effects. You do this by observing your samples in basic buffer conditions versus native matrix conditions. If your false positive completely disappears in a clean buffer, but roars back to life in the native matrix, you know for sure you're dealing with a matrix-mediated bridge, like a heterophilic antibody. But if it shows up in both conditions, your antibodies are likely just promiscuous and binding the wrong target directly. Step 4 is all about strategy, not guesswork. Probe your blocker and diluent on purpose. I highly advise against vague blocker swaps where you just try every different bottle you can find. Instead, use a matrix-informed panel. Your goal here is to preferentially suppress the false positive subset while completely preserving the true recovery of your actual analyte. You want to strategically increase the discrimination between the real signal and the interference. Step 5. Recheck your calibration and sample classification logic. As bench scientists, we often focus so purely on the biochemistry that we become totally blind to the reporting logic. Your standard curve can fit beautifully, looking totally flawless, while low-level false positives are completely ruining your sample classification right near the reporting cutoff. Always check how your biochemical modifications actually affect the clinical or study decision thresholds. Okay, so once you've used those 5 steps to identify the likely failure mechanism, a screening DOE becomes the absolute fastest way to fix it. By using a screening DOE, you can test interacting factors simultaneously. You can literally set up a single plate design that tests capture and detection antibody concentrations, sample dilution, blocker type, detergent concentration, and wash cycle counts all at once. This multivariate approach will quickly find the robust operating window that traditional OFAT tweaking would take months to stumble upon. Now, before you transfer this newly revised ELISA into formal validation or broader study use, you need rigorous evidence. You need to show that you tested the interference hypothesis directly. You need to show that you included representative matrix lots, challenged near-neighbor analytes, preserved your target recovery and precision, and proved the fix is actually stable across different days and different operators. Do not just settle for a plate that simply looks a little prettier on a Tuesday afternoon. Which brings us to a crucial point, summarized perfectly by this idea. If you cannot explain why the false positives happened, you have not really fixed the assay. I want to remind all my peers at the bench right now, simply changing conditions until the plate looks pretty doesn't fix the underlying mechanism. You've only changed the current conditions under which the failure is visible. Using a structured workflow and DOE ensures you actually understand the why, which is what makes your assay truly robust. We covered a lot of ground today, from the crushing pain of scale-up to the sheer power of structured troubleshooting. If this approach to assay optimization makes sense to you, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next deep dive. And before you go, drop a comment below and tell me, what is the single biggest assay bottleneck you are dealing with right now? Let's figure it out together.